The Farsight expedition was a military campaign conducted by the Tau Empire which sought to reclaim the worlds that had been lost to the Imperium of Man during the events of the Damocles Crusade. During the course of this campaign, as Farsight's forces succeeded in recapturing more and more worlds from the Imperium, the Tau would eventually come into conflict with the vast Orc Empire of Grog Ironteeth, whose hordes had been conducting an ever-increasing number of raids throughout the sector. Despite needing to only retake the world of Illuminas in order to complete his mission, Farsight would come to the conclusion that the Orcs posed a greater danger to the worlds of the newly established enclaves than the few scattered and disorganized Imperial forces that remained throughout the region. To this end, against the explicit orders and wishes of the ethereal caste, Farsight would order for his forces to begin a systematic purge of the greenskin threat. However, following the Battle of Atari Vo, it became clear that Farsight had greatly underestimated his foes, for upon returning to the core worlds of the Enclaves, he would discover that Orcs were rampaging throughout the region, unchecked and unchallenged. Intent on making amends for such a monumental blunder, Farsight would dispatch his forces to drive back the Orcs from each of the Enclave worlds. However, instead of simply meeting the Greenskins in battle on their terms, Farsight's forces would instead utilize a series of bizarre and unconventional tactics in order to take their foes unaware, such as by generating artificial firestorms, earthquakes, or intense tsunamis, utilizing the very elements themselves to lay waste to the Orcish hordes. In time, Farsight would even succeed in slaying Grog Ironteeth in single combat, resulting in the Orcs devolving into a state of infighting and petty squabbling as they sought to establish a new leader. Despite this initial confusion experienced by the Greenskins, they would remain a dire threat to the Enclaves, resulting in the conflict lasting for at least another decade. Eventually, after painstakingly eliminating the Greenskin threat from each of the Enclave worlds, Farsight's forces would pursue a band of Orcs to Arthas Moloch, a long-dead world which the Orcs had seemingly intended to pillage and plunder. The Tau would discover that the Orcs had taken shelter within the remains of an ancient temple, which would ultimately result in a firefight erupting between the two Xenos factions. As the battle raged on, the blood of the dead and dying would begin collecting around a large circular dais situated at the center of the temple complex, which, unbeknownst to the Tau, was in truth some sort of sacrificial chamber. After several violent minutes of bloodletting by both Orc and Tau alike, a warp rift leading into the very heart of the realm of chaos itself would open within the center of the chamber, before slowly disgorging a horde of demonic entities that began to indiscriminately attack both races. Seeking to obtain some tactical insight for the situation at hand, Farsight's battlesuit would take to the air and begin scanning the warp rift so as to try and make sense of the confusion that was happening down below. Upon gazing into the rift itself, Farsight will be bombarded with a number of intense visions which filled him with powerful feelings of dread, revulsion, and horror, depicting his race being corrupted by the Chaos Gods. One such vision would show a train of Tau slaves wandering through a desert of broken glass, bleeding heavily and grinning with a joy born from pain, while another would see a large group of Tau sprouting fungal growths before merging into a bloated, decaying monstrosity, while another still would depict titanic, fleshy constructs which screamed for all other races to join the Tau Empire or die. One vision in particular, however, would prove particularly distressing to Farsight, for this vision appeared to represent his very future. Farsight would bear witness to the aftermath of a great war upon the very homeworld of the Tau race, one which had pitted each of the various castes against one another in a manner evocative of the Mont Tau, or Death Age of Tau prehistory. The warriors of the Fire caste were seemingly driven into an apocalyptic frenzy, indiscriminately killing all that lay within their path. Farsight would then witness his own corrupted self, a tainted warrior king with a crown of bone protruding from his very skull, screaming in both rage and triumph as he strangled the life out of both Oshasera, better known as Commander Shadowsun, and Okais the Living Weapon, two warriors that had trained alongside Farsight during his youth who were second only to him in terms of martial skill and tactical prowess. Eventually, Farsight would experience a vision of the Cicatrix Maledictum, the colossal warp rift that would come to split the galaxy in two, being brought into existence. And upon doing so, Farsight would come to realize that these visions were not mere hallucinations and specters, but that they were both true and, more horrifyingly, inevitable. With that, Farsight would briefly fall into unconsciousness, his sanity having almost shattered upon learning the existence of chaos. Following the culmination of the battle, which saw the Tau successfully sealing the warp rift and banishing the remaining demons, Farsight would choose to enter a self-imposed exile where he would ponder and meditate upon his future, for Farsight had come to realize that he now simply knew too much. Given the visions that Farsight had experienced, and in particular those depicting him as a champion of Khorne, the Chaos God of bloodshed, hatred, and rage, in conjunction with him realizing that chaos is in itself inevitable, is Farsight destined to become a champion of the ruinous powers? While such a notion may initially seem highly unlikely, given the fact that the Tau demonstrate a fairly weak warp presence, this does not render them immune to either the attentions of demonic entities or the Chaos Gods themselves. Not only have a number of Tau been documented as falling to chaotic corruption, such as Paul Malkaor of the Watercast, who had become possessed by a demon of Tzeentch, but according to the novel Farsight, Empire of Lies, Khorne himself has begun to take a keen interest in Farsight, suggesting that the Chaos God intends to make him one of his champions, as detailed with the following passage.
Through the Contrarian's machinations, there was a traitor in the ranks, one who did the work of change without realizing it, and who harbored the sparks of corruption deep within. Better yet, there was one thread among the tapestry of fate that intersected with countless trillions of others. A warrior king, already a focal point of the young race's future. He was of interest to a rival deity, the Red God, the King of Skulls, reason enough to pull the strand in itself. The dizzying display of cause and effect overlapped, blended, and was refracted again. With a few minor manipulations, each splitting beam would merge with the others into blinding light, then utter blackness. In its wake would come a new order, a tyranny that would see the entire eastern fringe bathed in blood and fire. With enough whispers, with enough cultivated tragedy, with a measure of power lent here and a bargain struck there, everything would lead to the same point: the damnation of an entire race.
Khorne's interest in Farsight is certainly understandable, for not only is Farsight well known for both his martial pride and personal sense of honor, in spite of the Ethereal Cast's recent attempts to slander him as a traitor, but he is also incredibly skilled in the arts of hand-to-hand combat. This is in stark contrast to the traditional military mindset of the Tau Empire, which favours the use of long-range weaponry and eliminating their foes from a distance, although there do exist a small number of individuals, such as SlaaneshG of the Ethereal Cast, who understand the value and necessity of being a skilled melee fighter. While Khorne may have indeed turned his gaze towards Farsight, this in itself does not necessarily mean that the Tau is destined to become a champion of the Blood God or even a servant of the ruinous powers in general. That being said, however, one cannot help but compare Farsight's various actions to those of another once proud and noble warrior, one who would ultimately fall to the corrupting influence of chaos, whose very name would in time become little more than a vile curse to humanity forever after: the first War Master of the Imperium, Horus Lupercal. After all, both individuals once stood as the most beloved and respected military commanders of their respective empires, becoming seen as great heroes to the common people, only for both to essentially become traitors soon after learning the truth in regards to the existence of chaos, with both men feeling betrayed upon discovering that such knowledge had been deliberately kept hidden from them. However, unlike Horus, Farsight, despite establishing his own independent splinter faction and effectively seceding from the Tau Empire, has not made any attempts to usurp control of the Empire from the Ethereal Cast through militaristic means, or at the very least, not as of yet. not only was part of the reason behind Farsight breaking away from the Tau Empire due to the fact that he believed himself to be a very threat to the concept of the greater good, but the forces of the Farsight enclaves, despite what animosity they themselves may hold towards the ethereal caste, have lent their aid to the Tau Empire on multiple occasions in recent years, such as during the Second Battle of Mugalaf Bay, which saw Farsight, much to the surprise of all involved, coming to the aid of his former friend Shadow Sun against the forces of the Imperium. Some have also suggested that the existence of an elite unit of warriors led by Farsight himself, in conjunction with his preference for hand-to-hand combat, is proof that the Tau is indeed falling to the worship of Khorne. The reason for this train of thought is due solely to the fact that this unit, known simply as the Eight, is, as implied by their name, comprised of 8 highly skilled warriors. The reason as to why some find this significant is due to the fact that 8 is the sacred number of Khorne, and as such, some have suggested that the formation of the 8 is a sign of Farsight slowly turning to the worship of the Blood God. However, such evidence is extremely tenuous and circumstantial at best, with such a connection more likely being, at most, a simple coincidence. In either case, the act of falling to chaotic corruption is not always a swift or obvious one, but can often be a slow and insidious process taking place over the course of several years, decades, or even centuries, and will often begin with but a single, seemingly innocuous act. But given that Farsight had borne witness to a number of horrific visions depicting his race becoming corrupted by chaos, in addition to having battled against demonic entities on more than one occasion, such as with the aforementioned Portent, it's entirely possible that Farsight, now aware of the truth that the Ethereals had chosen to hide from his people, may actively choose to do everything within his power to prevent his people from falling to damnation. Perhaps this may very well result in him one day attempting to oust the Ethereals from power, should he believe that the Ethereal caste had somehow become tainted, despite whatever claims that the Ethereals have made in regards to Chaos being their enemy. Or perhaps Farsight may instead seek to establish alliances with those races known to frequently stand against the forces of chaos, such as the Eldari sect known as the Inari, or perhaps even certain groups from within the Imperium of Man itself, such as the Inquisition. But should Farsight attempt to undertake such actions for the betterment of his people, he could very well be acting inadvertently in service of the Blood God. After all, not only have other Tau fallen to the influence of Khorne, even if only temporarily, as detailed within the 8th edition Chaos Space Marine Codex, but some, such as the Pathfinder Commander Jakara, as detailed within the novel Firecast, would ponder as to whether the focus brought about through unabashed hatred and rage, 2 traits associated with Khorne specifically, along with the joy brought about through the act of killing, was indeed the true path to enlightenment instead of the philosophical concept of the greater good. Indeed, one does not necessarily need to serve the Chaos Gods directly in order to act on their behalf, as the gods have even been known to bestow their blessings upon those individuals who have actively fought against them. General Vendran Glass of the Sandava II Planetary Defense Force, for example, as detailed within the novel Warden of the Blade, would ascend to demonhood despite the fact that she had battled against the forces of chaos. This was due to the fact that, while she had indeed battled fiercely against the legions of Slaanesh, the Chaos God of Indulgence, Excess, and Pain, the General took great pleasure in combating against the demonic legions besieging her homeworld, which led to the Chaos God blessing the General with apotheosis following her death. As such, it's not entirely outside the realm of possibility for Khorne to bestow a number of gifts upon Farsight himself, regardless as to whether or not the Tau actively sought out such blessings. But seeing that Farsight had not only gazed into the proverbial abyss, but had actively chosen to turn his back upon it, it seems ultimately unlikely for him to fall to the worship of Khorne. But it is important to note that the descent into damnation is indeed a slippery slope, and all it could take is but one moment of doubt, or the undertaking of just a single horrific act, no matter how it may be justified as being necessary at the time, for Farsight to take his first steps upon the Eightfold Path. After all, as a wise man once said, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. What do you think? leave a comment below, and thanks for watching.